I never thought silence could hurt this much, especially when it came from the man who once held my hand and promised I'd be okay. If you've ever dreamed of quiet justice, if you've ever wondered what it feels like to be forgotten in a room full of smiles, then stay with me. Before we begin, take a second. Hit that like button if you believe stories can heal, subscribe if you believe truth has a way of finding light, and settle in. Because this is not a loud revenge story. This is a quiet one. My name is Clara. I'm not special. I'm not rich. I'm not powerful. At least that's what I was always told. I grew up believing I was the smallest voice in my family, the easiest one to overlook, the one people smiled at politely, then talked over. And it all began long before the will was ever read. I was born into a family that looked perfect from the outside. Big house, neat lawn, holiday dinners with matching plates and folded napkins. My grandfather Henry was the center of it all. People called him many things: a genius, a legend, a self-made billionaire. To me, he was just Grandpa. He smelled like old books and clean soap. His hands were rough but warm, and when I was little he used to let me sit on his lap while he read the newspaper. I didn't understand the words back then: stocks, markets, mergers. But I understood his voice, slow, calm, steady. When he spoke, people listened, including me. My parents were different. My father was quiet in a tired way, always trying to please someone, always hoping for approval that never came. My mother smiled a lot, but her smile never reached her eyes. They both lived under my grandfather's shadow, and they knew it. Family gatherings were never loud. They were careful. Careful words, careful laughs, careful compliments. Everything felt measured, like one wrong step could cost you something important. I learned early how to stay small. I learned not to interrupt, not to ask too many questions, not to expect much. When my cousins talked about private schools and summer trips, I stayed quiet. When they bragged about allowances, I nodded politely. I didn't envy them. Not really. I just wondered why I felt invisible. Grandpa Henry noticed me. Sometimes. Not in the way people notice a shining star, but like someone notices a familiar chair in the corner. Always there. Never questioned. When I was 10, I brought him a drawing. It was simple. Crayons. Stick figures. I had drawn our family. Everyone was smiling. Everyone except me. I had drawn myself standing a little farther away. He studied it for a long time. Then he said, "You see things clearly, Clara." That was it. No hug, no praise, just those words, and somehow they stayed with me longer than anything else he ever said. As I grew older, the distance between me and the rest of the family grew too. My cousins went to the best schools. They talked about careers that sounded expensive: finance, law, tech startups. I went to a regular school. I worked part-time jobs. I learned how to budget, how to wait, how to accept less without complaining. At family dinners, people asked me polite questions. How's school? What are you studying? I answered honestly, English, writing. They smiled, then turned back to someone else. Grandpa Henry rarely asked me anything, but when he did, it was always unexpected. Once, during a quiet afternoon, he asked me, "Do you believe money fixes things?" I didn't know how to answer, so I said, "I think it helps, but it doesn't listen." He nodded slowly. After that, he didn't speak for the rest of the day. Years passed. I moved out. I lived simply. A small apartment, used furniture, a quiet life. I called my parents every week. I visited on holidays. My grandfather aged quickly toward the end. The strong voice softened. The steady steps slowed. But the power around him never faded, even in a hospital bed. People leaned in when he spoke. Even doctors waited. The last time I saw him, he looked tired. Not weak, just done. I sat beside him while everyone else stood back. He held my hand. His grip was faint but firm. "Clara," he said softly, "people think being remembered is about money." I didn't reply. He continued, "But it's really about impact." Then he closed his eyes. That was the last conversation we ever had. When he passed away, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. Family members gathered not to grieve, but to wait. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew why we were there. The will. I wasn't nervous, not because I expected anything, but because I expected nothing. I sat in the back of the room at the lawyer's office, hands folded, eyes down. I watched my cousins whisper, my parents sit stiffly. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. That's when everything started to change. But not yet. Not in this part of the story. For now, I want you to understand something important. This isn't a story about money. It's about being seen. It's about silence and what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness. Take a breath with me. In part 2, I'll take you deeper into my family, into the quiet rules we never spoke about, into the moments that shaped who I became, long before the will ever mattered. And trust me, the real story is only just beginning. Before I tell you what happened in that lawyer's office, I need you to understand where I came from, because nothing about that day made sense. Unless you knew the silence I was raised in my family, love was never loud, no one hugged too long, no one cried openly, no one said, "I'm proud of you," unless it came with conditions. Everything was earned, everything was watched, and everything revolved around Grandpa Henry. Our family home sat on a wide piece of land, tall gates, trim hedges, a long driveway that curved like it was hiding something. Inside, the house was always clean, too clean, nothing felt lived in, like the house itself was holding its breath. We gathered there every Sunday. Same routine, same seats, same unspoken rules. My uncles talked business with Grandpa. My aunts discussed charity events. My cousins compared grades, schools, and plans. And I listened. No one ever told me not to speak. But no one ever waited for me to speak either. So I learned to observe. I learned how people smiled when Grandpa praised them. I learned how voices softened when he entered the room. I learned how quickly people changed when money was nearby. I saw it all, quietly. My cousins were not cruel. That's important to say. They were simply confident. They walked through life expecting doors to open. And they usually did. When they talked about the future, it sounded solid. Certain, when I talked about the future, it felt like guessing. I remember one Sunday dinner clearly. I was 16. Grandpa asked everyone at the table about their plans. One cousin said law school, another said investment banking, nods all around. Then Grandpa turned to me. "And you, Clara?" The table went silent. I said, "I want to write." Someone chuckled, not unkindly, just surprised. Grandpa stared at me for a moment. Then he said, "Writing is lonely work." I nodded. He didn't say anything else, and the conversation moved on. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside. "You embarrassed him," she whispered. I didn't understand. "I just answered honestly," I said. She sighed. "In this family, honesty should be useful." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. My parents lived careful lives. My father worked long hours at a job he didn't love, a job arranged through family connections. My mother volunteered endlessly, always smiling, always exhausted. They never complained, not out loud. But at night, when they thought I was asleep, I heard their voices, low, tired, worried. Money was everywhere in our family. But peace was not. As I grew older, Grandpa and I shared moments alone. They were rare, but meaningful. Sometimes he would ask me to read aloud from a book. Sometimes he would ask my opinion on things that had nothing to do with money, art, history, people. He never praised me, but he listened. And in my family, that was something. One afternoon when I was in college, he asked me to walk with him in the garden. The air smelled like wet earth. Birds were quiet. "Why do you keep yourself small?" he asked. I didn't know how to answer. "I don't," I said softly. He stopped walking. "You do," he said. "You wait to be allowed." That confused me. "Allowed to what?" I asked. "To exist fully," he said. Then he walked ahead, and that was the end of the conversation. I thought about that moment for years. I still do. College was hard for me, not because I wasn't capable, but because I was always afraid of failing, afraid of disappointing, afraid of taking up too much space. I worked part-time. I studied at night. I didn't ask Grandpa for help. Not once, not because I was proud, but because I didn't want to owe him anything. When my cousins graduated, the family celebrated. Big dinners, speeches, champagne. When I graduated, my parents took me out to eat. Just the three of us. They were proud. I could see it. But there was still that quiet question in their eyes. What now? I moved into my small apartment shortly after. It had thin walls, a loud neighbor, a leaky sink. But it was mine. For the first time, I could breathe. I wrote at night. Stories, journals, letters I never sent. Writing was where I told the truth. Grandpa called me once during that time. His voice was weaker. "I hear you're living simply," he said. "Yes," I replied. "Does it scare you?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "No," I said, "it feels honest." He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Honesty is expensive," and hung up. As his health declined, the family grew closer, not emotionally, physically. Everyone visited more. Everyone checked in. Everyone paid attention, except me, not because I didn't care, but because no one asked me to. So I stayed back, I waited. When Grandpa finally passed, the family cried. Real tears, real loss. But beneath it, there was something else, anticipation. It sat in the room like a shadow. The will reading was scheduled for a gray morning. Rain tapped against the windows. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and coffee. We sat in rows, together, but not connected. I remember thinking how strange it was, how quiet revenge doesn't begin with anger, it begins with clarity. After Grandpa Henry died, time felt strange. Days moved forward, but something in the air stayed stuck, like the house was still waiting for him to come back and set things right. In the weeks before the will reading, the family stayed close, too close. Text messages flew back and forth. Phone calls ended quickly when I entered rooms. Voices lowered when my name came up. No one was rude to me. That's the hardest part. They were polite, careful, almost kind, and that made everything feel worse. My parents didn't talk much during that time. My father stared at the television without watching it. My mother cleaned things that were already clean. I asked once, "Are you okay?" She smiled. "Of course," she said. "We're just tired." But I knew that wasn't true. One afternoon, my cousin Daniel stopped by my apartment. That alone surprised me. He looked around politely. "Nice place," he said. I knew what he meant. Small, simple, temporary. We sat across from each other, coffee growing cold between us. "So," he said casually, "any idea what Grandpa left you?" I laughed softly. "No," I said. "Probably his old books." Daniel smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Well," he said, "you never know." Then he stood and left, and I sat there wondering why the question bothered me so much. At night, I dreamed of Grandpa. Not sick, not tired, just quiet, watching. The first real tension came a few days before the will reading. The family gathered at my parents' house, not for dinner, for conversation. That's what my aunt called it. We sat in the living room, curtains drawn, lights low. My uncle cleared his throat. "We should manage expectations," he said. Everyone nodded. My mother's hand tightened around mine. Someone said Grandpa had responsibilities. Another said he believed in rewarding effort. I said nothing because I already knew what they were trying to say. Later in the kitchen, my mother spoke, softly. "I don't want you to be disappointed," she said. "I won't be," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. "You say that like you've already accepted something," she said. I shrugged. "I have." She hugged me then, briefly, like she was afraid of being seen. The morning of the will reading arrived quietly. Rain fell steady and slow. I wore a simple dress, nothing dark, nothing dramatic, just something comfortable. Because I didn't feel like I was going to battle. I felt like I was attending a confirmation. At the lawyer's office, everyone arrived early. My cousins sat together, my uncles spoke in low voices. I sat alone, no one joined me, but no one asked me to move either. The lawyer began reading. Assets, properties, accounts, millions. Each name called felt like a bell ringing. My cousins smiled politely. My aunts nodded. My parents sat still, very still. I waited, not with hope, with curiosity. What did Grandpa think of me in the end? Then the lawyer paused, cleared his throat. "And to Clara," he said. The room shifted, just slightly. I felt eyes turn toward me. "And to Clara," he repeated. "Henry leaves." I held my breath. A personal letter. That was all. No property, no money, just a letter. The room went silent. Then came the small sounds, a cough, a chair moving, someone whispering, "That's it?" My cousin Daniel looked at me with something like relief. My aunt smiled sympathetically. My mother's face went pale. The lawyer handed me an envelope, thick, cream-colored. My name written in Grandpa's familiar hand. For a moment I couldn't move, not because I was hurt, but because something inside me felt settled. After the reading, people avoided my eyes. Some offered kind words. "I'm sure it meant a lot," one said. "He always had his reasons," another added. My parents didn't say anything, they just held my hands. At home that night, I sat alone. The letter rested unopened on the table. I stared at it for a long time. Rain tapped against the window. The apartment felt smaller than usual, quieter. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even sad. I felt seen in a strange, uncomfortable way. I opened the letter, but I didn't read it yet. I wasn't ready, because deep down I knew whatever was inside was going to change everything. I sat at my small kitchen table for a long time. The letter stayed unopened between my hands. Not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I was afraid of what it might make me feel. Outside, the rain kept falling, slow, patient, like it wasn't in a hurry either. I made tea. That might sound strange, but it felt right. Grandpa always said you should never read important things too quickly. Let your hands warm first, he once told me, so your heart doesn't rush ahead of your mind. I wrapped my fingers around the cup. Steam rose gently. Then I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thick, folded carefully. His handwriting filled the page, strong even now. I took a breath and began to read. Clara, it started. No title, no explanation, just my name. I know you are probably wondering why you are reading this instead of hearing numbers. I stopped. My throat tightened. He knew. I have watched you longer than you think, the letter continued, longer than anyone else in this family ever bothered to. Tears blurred the page, but I kept reading. You were quiet, not because you were weak, but because you were listening. My chest ached. In a family full of voices competing for space, you chose understanding instead of volume. I had never heard anyone describe me that way before. I did not give you money, he wrote, because money would have trapped you. I frowned. Trapped me? Everyone else in this family already belongs to it. They orbit it. They obey it. The words felt heavy. You never did. I leaned back in my chair. The rain outside grew louder. You asked questions no one else dared to ask. You saw patterns others ignored. My hands shook. You saw the cost of comfort, the weight of approval. I swallowed hard. And you chose freedom. Then came the part that changed everything. I have already given you what the others will never have. I whispered, what? As if he could hear me. I arranged for your education without you knowing. Your scholarships were not luck. My heart skipped. Your student debts were quietly cleared. Tears spilled freely now. You were never abandoned, Clara. You were protected. I remembered the moments that never quite made sense. The sudden approval letters, the unexpected grants. I had always thought I was just fortunate. I watched you struggle on purpose, the letter said. That hurt until I read the next line. So you would never confuse survival with entitlement. I pressed my hand to my mouth. He knew exactly what he was doing. My money will tear this family apart, he wrote. Not today, but soon. My breathing slowed. They will argue, compete, measure themselves against one another. I could already imagine it. And they will never notice the quiet one who walked away whole. The final lines were written more slowly, the ink slightly darker. I leave you no inheritance because you already inherited yourself. My tears fell onto the paper. I am proud of you. That was it, no signature, just the truth. I sat there long after the letter ended. The tea had gone cold, the rain softened, and something inside me shifted. I wasn't rejected, I was trusted. The next weeks proved him right. The family began to fracture, arguments over assets, accusations, lawsuits whispered about. My phone rang often. People checking in, people asking questions, people suddenly interested in me. I didn't answer most of them, not out of spite, but out of clarity. My parents struggled. The money they received came with expectations, pressure. They fought more, they worried more, they aged faster. And me, I slept better than I ever had. I wrote every day. I worked, I lived, quietly. One afternoon, months later, I returned to the family house. The garden was overgrown, the gates rusted. I sat where Grandpa once sat, and I understood. This was the revenge, not punishment, not humiliation, but peace. Time has a way of revealing things, not all at once, not loudly, but steadily. Like water shaping stone. Months passed after the will was read, then a year, and slowly, the money began to show its weight. At first, everything looked fine from the outside. New cars appeared in driveways. Renovations began. Vacations were posted online with smiling faces. But underneath those pictures, something was cracking. Family gatherings became rare. When they did happen, they felt different. Shorter, sharper. Conversations circled around who got what, who deserved more, who felt cheated. No one talked about Grandpa anymore. My parents tried to hold on. They paid off debts, they helped relatives, they said yes too often, and the money drained them, not financially. Emotionally, one evening my mother called me crying. "I don't recognize us anymore," she said. I listened. I didn't fix anything. I just listened, the way Grandpa taught me. Then came the phone calls. My cousins, my uncles, my aunts, one by one, they asked how I was doing. They asked where I was living. They asked what I was working on. And sometimes, they asked about the letter. I never shared it. Not because I wanted to keep a secret, but because it wasn't meant to be explained. It was meant to be lived. One afternoon, Daniel showed up again. He looked tired, older, less certain. We sat across from each other, just like before. "You seem calm," he said. I nodded. "I am." He hesitated. "Do you ever feel angry?" he asked. I thought about it. "No," I said honestly. "Do you?" I asked. He looked down. That was answer enough. The family finally gathered again 2 years later, not for celebration, for conflict. Arguments erupted over management, shares, control. Voices rose. Hands slammed tables. I sat quietly at the edge of the room, watching, listening. At one point, someone turned to me. "You don't understand," my aunt said sharply. "You didn't have anything at stake." I smiled gently. "I had everything at stake," I said. "I just didn't bet it on money." The room went silent. Later that night, my father hugged me, a real hug, long. "I think your grandfather knew," he whispered. I nodded. He did. Over time, the calls stopped, not because of anger, but because there was nothing left to ask. I wasn't at part of the competition. I never had been. I moved to a quieter town, closer to nature. I wrote more, not for approval, but for truth. Sometimes I visit Grandpa's grave. I don't bring flowers, just time. I sit, I breathe, and I thank him. Because the greatest inheritance I ever received was freedom. I used to think revenge had to be loud. I thought it needed raised voices, sharp words, public moments that made people feel small. That's what stories taught me. But life taught me something else. Real revenge doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It doesn't even announce itself. It simply lives well. Years have passed now. The family still exists, but not the way it used to. Some don't speak anymore. Some still argue about fairness. Some pretend nothing ever happened. And me? I'm still quiet, but I am no longer small. I live in a modest home. Sunlight reaches the kitchen every morning. Birds gather near the window. I write every day. Some days it's messy, some days it's beautiful, but it's always honest. I think about Grandpa often, not with sadness but with understanding. He didn't punish anyone. He didn't shame them. He let truth do the work. He showed me that silence can be strong, that walking away can be power, that peace is sometimes the loudest answer of all. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever felt forgotten, please remember this. Not everything you deserve will come wrapped in money. Some gifts come as freedom, some come as clarity, some come as the strength to choose yourself, and sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is living a life so whole that no one can ever take it from you. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If it moved you, if it made you think, please take a moment, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments. What does quiet strength mean to you? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories told gently, honestly, and from the heart. Until next time, be kind to yourself,